everyone. Welcome to another episode of On the Flip Side. On the first Monday of every month, we talk about any topic in mindset. And every other Monday after that, it's all about real estate, any topic in real estate. My name is Diana Lizarazo, and today's guest speaker, it's Mark Loeffler. Now, before we get started, I want to share some amazing news with you. I have an application, it's called Refam. It is an application, it's a social networking platform that solves two critical problems in the real estate investing industry. It helps you build credibility and trust, or find it if that's what you need. And it helps with searchability, visibility, helping to find the right kind of people that you need or to be found. Now, and if that interests you, then get onto the website. You can read a lot more about it. It's a social networking platform, and it's realestateinvestorfam.com. So check it out. You're going to love it. It's an amazing platform, and I would love to hear your opinions on it. Now let's get back to the show. On the flip side, our guest speakers are real estate investors here to help you by sharing their learning experiences. And so today we're going to be talking about how to BRRRR multifamily buildings. So we're going to get to hear Mark's point of view on it. It's going to be so much fun. Let's send him some thumbs up. Let's send him some hearts, and let's welcome him on the stage. Oh, I don't know why I can't get him on. Come on, let's do this. I may have to call you on video offline. I feel like sometimes it's so finicky. We may have to do a second run on this. I don't know. I'm accepting your invites. I don't know why it's being finicky though. Are you seeing anything? So I'm going to cancel it. And then I'm going to send the invite to you. I just sent it. Let me know if you see it. I don't know why Instagram's been finicky these days. Oh, there you go. I think we got you. Hey, Mark.
How's it going?
We're good. Good. How are you?
Very good.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. So let's start with just telling the viewers a little bit about yourself. What's your real estate experience like? How long have you been in it? Whatever you'd like to share.
Sure. So I started real estate investing about 23, 24 years ago. I started with duplexes, worked up to triplexes, fourplexes, then got into apartment buildings. I did my first apartment building probably 12 years ago now. And in that process, I got licensed. I've had various real estate investing businesses that I've either sold or closed down or did whatever. I've pretty much tried most real estate strategies when it comes to investing, and I've settled on BRRRRing apartment buildings.
I love it. And I feel like it's actually, I feel like that's very normal with people that have the entrepreneur mentality. We love to try everything, right? And finally you find something that makes sense or that keeps you interested for a short time. And then maybe again, you're on to the next biggest new thing that excites you.
The next flashy object, yes.
Exactly. So awesome. So since we're going to be talking about that BRRRRing multifamilies, I kind of want to start with how has that changed for you because this economy has changed. Have you actually had to make any changes to being able to BRRRR multifamily buildings in this environment?
Yes and no. I mean, the rules keep changing on financing, so you got to roll with that a little bit. The rental market, obviously, if you're in Ontario, the rental market's still really strong. Rents are growing month over month, just because obviously the amount of people coming in to the area obviously need to well, I mean, again, if you increase demand and don't increase supply, then obviously prices go up,
Mm-hmm.
which is good for somebody who's burning residential units in any case. But I mean, one of the reasons that apartment buildings or commercial buildings make so much sense is because it's based on the income and not the not comparables per se. So if you can lower $1 in expenses or raise $1 in profit, then or in revenue that increases your profit, then you get 20 times that dollar. So
100%. Yeah, I think that's the fun part of it. It's like if you're fixing it on one unit and you have to do it across, then you get to multiply that and then that's where you really start seeing the benefits.
yeah.
So what kind of are you doing one specifically right now through financing, or have you finished one up? I was curious to hear like how was your experience with refinancing, or even if you've heard of others, because I feel like I mean as because you're a realtor also for the commercial side, or are you
Yeah,
realtor for the commercial side? Yeah.
commercial side, yeah. I have a team that does the residential as well, but I mainly focus on commercial. So financing is just different right now. CMH. So I mean, in the multifamily space, CMHC brought out a product called MLI Select. It proved to be way too popular, and so now they're coming back on that with, hey, there's further restrictions on how you're going to do it, and you have to be in the project for 2 years. You have to be with a CMHC lender of choice, just various things, because it did prove to be too popular. I mean, listen, if you're getting a 50-year amortization and 5%, 95% refinancing, of course, that's going to be popular with most investors, especially since the fees were lower than regular CMHC and the rates were as good or better than regular CMHC as well, right? So you combine all those things and you make a very popular program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was very popular.
Yeah.
And so do you still feel like it's still pretty popular right now?
I mean, everybody wants MLI Select. It's the
Mhm.
gold standard that you want to get. Because again, if you can get a 50-year amortization, even if you have to go for a 10-year mortgage, it just makes sense. Like your payments are
Mhm.
going to be that much lower. Yeah, you're not going to pay off much interest or much principal, um, but then you can be free to choose what you want to do with your cash flow instead of just putting it into the piggy bank.
Yeah, exactly. You definitely can take advantage of the cash flow that you get.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with that, what about on the renovation side? Are you seeing people changing the way they're doing renovations, let's say now, to still go into MLI Select, or are you seeing anything? Because like that, like things are still a little bit more getting still a bit expensive, and like you said, that if it's expensive for one unit, also in that sense, things multiply out too. So I'm curious if you're seeing any if they're not doing certain renovations or whatever you see.
Well, so it depends where you are. I mean, in Ontario, a lot of people are using the MLI Select, not through the affordability because it's so hard to get affordable rents in Ontario, just because the income is so low in most areas, the gross household income. So they're using more the energy efficiency. So with the energy efficiency, they're going to do, a lot of those types of upgrades, which are going to get them the most amount of points on the energy efficiency, so they can then qualify for MLI Select. Um, so have they changed recently just because it's more expensive? Yes and no. Um, I know that we're trying to save more of the old stuff in some of our buildings now. Repurpose it, repaint it, use a lot of the existing materials that we have in place, and try to keep costs down that way. But we've kind of always done that. But it's, again, where do you get your biggest bang for your buck? And it's kitchens, bathrooms, floors, and paint and lighting, right? So we're still doing that, obviously. But you know, if we can repurpose something, we'll definitely repurpose it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then they're probably on the renovation side, at least in the kind of in the projects that you've worked on, you haven't changed that part too much.
No, we're still pretty much like, well, so we used to put in all of our stuff in Ontario, we used to put washer dryers. So in Alberta, um, typically because the electrical system and the plumbing system can't handle it, we're not doing that anymore. Because the cost to put a washer dryer in is like $15,000. And
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you, we just don't get the economic benefit from it. To be, you know, basically we'd have to get the whole stack of units available. Then we'd have to run new plumbing, new electrical, and yeah, it's just way harder to do. So it's way more efficient and way easier to go. You know, we can go unit by unit. We do cosmetic, and then we move on.
Mm-hmm. Curious on your opinion now that you're saying that, because I'm not in the big multis, I'm in the small multis. And like you said, for example, in the small multis, it's really about the value that you get for the house. So for example, like how you're saying washers, dryers, adding those into your units could help increase the value. There's certain things that like that will help increase the value of the property. Whereas on the commercial side, it's more about the income that it generates and not really on the value of the property so
Yeah.
much. So in that aspect, pardon?
So I mean, let's be honest. A washer dryer in your unit will get you an extra $50 to $75 for
Mm-hmm.
that unit. Um, so it actually doesn't increase the value of the smaller buildings. It does increase the value of the larger buildings, but it's just not worth the effort to go through, in my opinion. But on the
Mm-hmm.
smaller buildings, yes, it's going to get you more revenue,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't necessitate that you're going to get more value out of it. It just means you're going to make more money.
Exactly. Like you'll probably refinance higher, at least before. At least before you would probably
Uh,
refinance higher.
yeah, I mean, your refinance is based on what's sold in the area that's comparable to your property, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there was one down the street and they got, I don't know, $500 less month per rent, they're not really just going to sit there and say, oh, you got $500 more in rent, therefore you're worth that much more. You're not worth 20 times more of that $500. They're going to be like, well,
Mm-hmm.
that sold for this, so maybe you're worth 10 grand more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to get to was, because I knew like lots of people were putting in, like lots of washer dryers in small residentials, putting a lot of bling into the houses, trying to get that top value and when they would appraise it so they could pull out as much as they could. Even before where we're at now, when we were like in that COVID time where prices were going up, was that ever a thought to do that on the big multis? Because like you said, it is more about the income and not about the appraisal. But in the big commercial properties though, people were still like the price of the houses, the price of the buildings were quite high.
Well, they're still quite high.
Yeah, they're still quite high.
But I mean, like back then, like you could, like if you wanted to buy an apartment building, you were probably buying like a sub 3 cap if it needed a bunch of work or it had low paying tenants, because you had the opportunity then to go in and raise those rents whenever they left. Um, as right now, like even now, like you're still paying sub 4 cap for an opportunity building, maybe just over, and a fully turnkey, you're maybe 5.5 cap. Um, so it's just one of those. So I mean, I guess to come back to the original question, where are you putting that bling in? 100%. So I mean, there's two schools of thought. I always went to the nicer end, because I wanted that better quality tenant, but also because we're in Ontario, I could raise my rent on vacancy, but after you can get what 2.5%, 1.5% some years. So I always wanted to maximize my rent. Whereas, somebody could just say, hey, like I was renting that for $500. I painted it, the landlord special where I painted over all the light switches and everything. and I rented it out for $1,500. I don't care about that extra $400 a month, or 500 or 600, or that better quality tenant.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good analysis. Yeah, because it's very interesting to see because there are also just even many differences like that between the smalls to the bigs. They're treated so differently. Is there any other differences that you'd like to discuss with, say, with the small residential to the bigger units and why investors would why go into the bigger units, into the bigger buildings?
I mean, the bigger buildings, it's a business, right? You're running a business. Like, you get better terms on your financing. You get better rates from your property manager. You typically have an on-site super. You get better rates from the contractors because they know, hey, you got 84 units. If you got, individual furnaces in all of them, you're buying 84 furnaces. So it's like, okay, I'm going to, if you have one house that has a furnace, then they're, well, okay, we're going to come out and do that one house. But if I can send a crew of guys there for a week and do and get 20 of them done, then they're just going to say, okay, well, I can send a crew there for a week and we know we have the work, so we'll give you a better deal because we're not going place to place. We're not burning fuel. We're not, doing all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're definitely getting better rates on most things the bigger you go. And then obviously the more units you have, the more savings you're going to get as well. But because it's a business, right? They know, and like when you're buying something like a 20, 30, 40 unit building, the bank knows they're dealing with a business person. That's why they like it. And so I don't know if this has come to fruition. I'd have to ask the mortgage brokers, but I know that they were like the bank or the regulator was pushing for, anybody who had more than 3 or 4 properties to then have to be in commercial financing, which has never been the case in Canada. And it's difficult to get commercial financing on smaller properties. And I thought this would have been a boon because, again, if you had a good business plan that was buying 2-unit properties and turning them into 4-unit properties, then you could keep going ahead and doing that with commercial financing. Where right now, like, it's based on how much income you have and can qualify for, whereas that would have been, hey, here's the business plan. Okay, I have 20 units in these 5 buildings, and here's the business plan moving forward. And they could go based on that business plan. Whereas that's not the case right now. So what happens is most people typically sell their 3 or 4 unit properties and then start buying apartment buildings at some point.
Mm. And this is something that has just changed in the last year or two?
They announced it 6-8 months ago or something like that. I don't know that they have. Yeah, I don't know if they've implemented it as of yet, just because of all the interest rate hikes and all those types of things. So maybe they're like, we'll just hold off. I actually thought it would have been a good thing for a professional real estate investor. Maybe not so much for the amateurish ones, but I don't know that they're buying more than 4 or 5 properties anyways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, when you're saying properties, you're talking about big buildings as in
No,
property?
the small buildings that, like, they were going to take the people who are buying those and getting those under residential mortgages and force them to use commercial financing, which
But you're
is more
saying that they're
stringent.
not going to do that now, right?
I don't know what's come of it. Again, I don't deal in that market really that much anymore. So I don't know. I'd have to ask like a mortgage broker what's happened with that. But yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting though to hear that because yeah, I did hear about that. You could do it, so I feel like I'll definitely have to look into that.
Yeah.
Because it's funny you say that. I was actually thinking, I'm like, oh, I should group some of my houses together and just put them, but they may not be allowing that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, they're still there. I mean, they were doing it. I know people who've done it through CIBC and that type of thing. But for the most part, most people sell up and just start buying bigger properties.
yeah.
And which, if we were in the States and we had a 1031 exchange, that would have been really good. But we don't. So you pay your taxes on it and you move on. And so it might be the government shooting themselves in the foot by, doing something that is going to erase some revenue over here and not gain them any new revenue. But, I feel that the government is good at doing that anyways, is shooting themselves in the foot.
Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about benefits, it benefiting the more experienced investors to the amateurs. What kind of benefits were you talking about?
So, I mean, typically, like if you're a full-time real estate investor, you probably don't have any outside income. So you're not going to, if you're in a commercial mortgage, yes, they're going to look at your income and your credit. But they're also going to be like, okay, what's the business plan? What's happening with these other properties that we're going to, work with? And what's the business plan moving forward? And it's like, okay, we like that business plan moving forward. We're going to work with this person. And that's what it is on the bigger multis right now is, oh, what's the business plan? Okay, what's the cost? What's the in? What's the out? Perfect. We're comfortable with that. Let's move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what do you say? Because I feel like you said, it became very popular in the last few years to get into the big multifamily buildings. So there probably have been a lot of also inexperienced people going into there. What are the kind of mistakes that you're seeing that the amateurs are doing that we should tell the audience so they don't do it themselves?
Well, it's so funny because I mean it's still probably the case, but you used to be able to buy an apartment building in Hamilton for $700, $800, $900,000, which is not the case. But you're still paying the same amount for, like, call it a 10, 12 unit building as you're buying a house for in Toronto. So people see that and say, oh, I bought my house for $2 million. I can buy this, uh, 6 unit or 10 or 8 or 10 unit for $2 million in a place called Hamilton or Brantford, whatnot. And they basically look at it because it's cheap. They don't really look at the area it's in. They don't understand that, okay, now who am I going to rent to? What's the layout? What's the long-term sustainability on that project? And like a lot of the older buildings in Hamilton, it's, well, okay, they look nice, but has any work been done to the plumbing, to the electrical? Like what's been upgraded, what hasn't? What can of worms am I opening, right? Like
Yeah.
what am I opening when I'm buying something like this? And back then, like these properties used to turn over every couple of years, just because the tenant profile was so bad on them that people would be like, like they'd spend $10,000 to do a nice renovation and then come in a year, 2 years later, and like it was just like, no, they had to do it
That's
again.
that's a very good point, and that's very true because I am actually, it's funny you say that, I'm seeing that with some friends that they went into it. So many problems are coming up because like that the planning, which is the purpose of the commercial side, doesn't fully get done,
Mm-hmm.
and or they think let's just do cosmetic, which sometimes that's like you said, you open up a can of
Yeah.
worms, and then all of a sudden, you instead of having like a contractor in there to like fully vet out the place properly, because that's probably usually I think one of the biggest problems is understanding, like you said, the age of the building, like what hasn't been done, like if things are to code. And that's actually personally why I like that's personally why I like the full gut type of jobs. If I've always said if I were to do a building, because I would like to get into a building, but I would want one where it's like take it down to the studs, because like you said, it's an old building. I would just love to like build it out, and then I know like for 10 years, 15 years, I'll like probably never have to touch it again. But that's very expensive right now.
It's well, it's
But that would be
expensive.
my dream project, I would say.
It's always been expensive. Those were my first two properties. Is maybe first three multifamily properties. Is I took it down to the studs, new wiring, new plumbing, heating in each unit typically. But yeah, now I mean those 60, $70,000 per unit renos would now be 100, 120, and maybe not worth it. And then I got into, because I was buying wood frame apartments in Hamilton at the time. And then I just got into buying concrete ones, which were typically newer, built in the 70s, and doing more cosmetic renos just because they were typically nicer, and the maintenance had been more kept up on stuff like that because they were in nicer areas. Um,
Hmm.
I have reverted to stick frame in Edmonton, even though I said I'd never buy stick frame again. It's just, that's that's the beast out there. There's not many concrete construction out there. So,
And what did you not like about that is wood framing, stick frame?
so it's noise transfer between units. It's, typically you're buying an older property. So it's not the case so much in Edmonton. Like a 30, 40-year-old property in Edmonton is old. Whereas, you're buying stick frame in, say, Hamilton, and they're almost 100 years old now. They're 90, 80, 90 years old. So they don't have the soundproofing between units. They don't have any of that stuff. Whereas some of the newer ones do, obviously, because that was brought into code later. So that was the biggest thing about why I wanted concrete in Hamilton rather than the wood frame. And I guess that applies to areas that you're going to buy. If you're going to buy and they're going to have older properties that are going to be like 80, 90, 100 years old, rather than 30 or 40 years old as well.
Mm-hmm. So that was the difference, I guess, with Alberta. They weren't as old, so they were probably meeting better standards at that time because they were already at that level by then.
That's correct. Yeah.
And that's interesting because it's true. We'll think like that you have a bad experience in one and you're like, this is probably going to give me too many problems. But then in other provinces, you never know, things could be so much more different or different even in the other direction,
Yeah.
You're like, I love this. Like, imagine being in Alberta and be like, I love these types of buildings. And then you go to like Ontario, you're like, oh my God, it's a disaster and a half right now.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because I just came back from like Europe, right? Lisbon. And like you're sitting there over there and they're like 100 years old. That's new. Right?
That's new.
That's new because you got 400 or 500-year-old properties that are just, they're massive and, but that comes with its own problems too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think a great point there is making sure you understand the area you're in and the type of properties they are. Because like you're saying, like things can be so different. Even like you're saying, it could be the same building and wood frame, but standards have changed. That would make maybe another one not maybe look so bad or look bad because of how old it really is.
And that's where, your building condition reports and all that type of thing come into effect, right? I guess that's the other thing with commercial is like you're a lot more upfront with reports, like for like cost wise. Like if you're buying a property that you're gonna like basically take down to the studs, in residential, you're just like, okay, I don't really need a building condition report or a home inspection because I'm gonna just rip everything out anyways. Whereas even if I'm going to do that on an apartment building, they're like, we still need a building condition report. So, you're $3,000 to $5,000. Your appraisal is $3,000 to $5,000. You have to do a phase one environmental, which can be, $4,000 to $7,000. So it's just one of those things. Like you're going to be $20,000 before you even sign the paperwork for a mortgage or anything.
And I feel like that's at least a good testament to getting into it because it shows you there is a lot more upfront money that you have to deal with compared to the residential where, I mean, your inspection report is like $400 maybe.
Yeah. And maybe you have to do an appraisal for $500, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as bad compared to there. It's like it's serious. You're talking about bigger money over there.
Yeah.
Although I find that funny because you would think that would deter the newer investors from going or getting a little bit more experience or like partnering with people that have experience. But I don't know how did they just what has your experience been with that? Because it does surprise me when you're dealing with like bigger money and not that money scares you, but I feel like at least with me, I would definitely, like you said, I'd be really making sure I'm doing all my due diligence. Whereas, like that, like I don't know, I've seen some investors where they put themselves in really tough situations because they were inexperienced in it and kind of like jumped in with their eyes closed.
Yeah, I've seen that a bunch too, and I guess they get it's shiny
Object syndrome.
object syndrome where they're like, oh, that looks so easy. And like they hear we speak about it, it's like, converting 1 to 4 units. Oh, well, that sounds easy. Anybody can do it. And then they get into it and they're like, oh, it's not that easy, right? Like you're dealing with, even, if you're getting construction financing, dealing with that, it's just, it's a lot of work and a lot of effort to, work with that bank to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and everything so they can send funds. And that could be a month process. And if you're dealing in $1 million project renovation, then you're eating that until that comes in. So maybe then you have to stop for that month while you're trying to get money, right? Or slow it down. Then that lengthens your time frame of how long you have to carry the financing and everything like that as well.
And do you think actually maybe the reason also why some new investors make these mistakes is because they go private first and they don't see everything? Because do all privates, for example, ask for the environmental, or for example, they may get private doesn't even know about doing environmental, and then when you go to your A or B lender, all of a sudden they have to do all these things and screw themselves over or something. I've just always been curious because I just find like that. It's like running a business, and I just don't understand how sometimes people can like really screw it up badly.
So, I mean, on these bigger projects, so most people aren't, like you can get private financing to begin with, but like the person who's financing that privately on one of these things, like they're more sophisticated than the average Joe Schmo out there on the street. So they're going to ask for various things to, happen before they're going to lend you their money, because again, they're going to want the business plan. They're going to want to know what's going to happen so they can be sure that they're not going to lose their money, because that's their rule number one, is don't kill the golden goose, right? The golden goose is their capital that keeps on laying the golden egg. So they may not want the environmental or like a building condition report, but they do want to know the business plan. They want to know when they're getting their money back, how long is it going to be, what's the plan to get that money back? Because again, they don't want to kill the golden goose, which is their capital.
Yeah, 100%. So what other kind of things have you seen? Because like that, I think financing, to be honest, has probably been the forefront of a lot of things with the multifamily, like people not being able to. What kind of reasons have you seen from either MLI Select or maybe going from private to A-lender? Like what kind of changes have you seen that have given people problems to get their properties refinanced, like the big buildings refinanced?
So number one would be a building condition report that doesn't say it has 50 years of economic life left. If it says you have 30 years of economic life left, that's as much life as they'll give you on the mortgage, basically. If it says 30 years of economic life, well, then, the building might not be there in 50 years, so they're not going to finance it. Over or underestimating some costs, because they're going to look in and say, oh, well, let's see the bills for these types of things. So, if you have an extra dollar in expense that wasn't there, that's going to lower your overall borrowing. One of the things that has made everyone smart in the last 2 years is, if you projected certain rents, typically you're getting much better rents now than you were 2 years ago, or you should be. If you're not, then maybe you should look at what you're doing for marketing for those tenants. But typically, that's the biggest thing I see is the building condition report, and then the expenses not in line with what you've sent them to begin with.
Oh yeah, I didn't think of that. But how would they not be in line? Because don't they will ask for the proof of it, wouldn't they? Of like what it is? Is it like you put your rough numbers in, they check it, and then once you give the actual numbers, then that's when they start noticing? Is that kind of situation?
Yeah, because a lot of people will just send in the pro forma and not actually look, and then they miss something or do something, right? That's the, yeah.
Yeah, that can definitely, but that's more of, that would just give a problem of not getting the amount that you are expecting. It would be more, it's not as if you like lose the refinance, would you?
Yeah, well, no, and you'll never lose the refinance. Um, if bank or if CMHC is going to lend you the money, you're not going to lose the thing. You're just going to get less money. And the other thing is, like, if rates change between now and the time you're closing, then they don't lock in rates till I think it's 2 weeks before closing. So then you're probably doing a mortgage buy down. So again, you're getting less out than you think you were to begin with.
Sorry, what's a mortgage buy down?
So mortgage buy down is where you pay some of the funds you're going to get to buy down the interest rates that you're going to pay on the loan. So you can buy down any mortgage right now, like if it's 7%, and you're getting $1 million, maybe you say, okay, only give me $900,000, but I'm going to buy the rate down to 6%.
So you'd pay the difference of that interest, you're saying,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. And you would pay it, I guess, for this year. Would it be like you pay for this year and then the next 20 years is whatever? Like you say, like it's 7%. Like you said, you pay the difference and let's say you're at 5. So
No,
you pay that.
you're basically buying your mortgage down because that's what you would qualify it at. So you have to you're basically paying that interest till the end of the term.
Paying the 7%.
Yeah, you're paying that 1% difference up front because that's what you had qualified at. So now you're getting less cash.
But you do it only for the 1 year term? Oh,
Well, I mean, if you're doing CMHC takeout, you're doing a 5 to 10 year term minimum.
right. So it would be 5 years of that. Let's say you want to, if it's
Yeah,
reduced to 1%, it would be
yeah,
5 years of that?
yeah.
So 5%?
I'm actually not 100% on that. Like, again, we'd have to talk to my commercial mortgage broker, who would have that information rather than me just spitballing it. But I know it's not insignificant. So
Mhm. Yeah, because I just wonder what's the purpose of doing the buy down is what I was wondering, really. Like
well,
why
yeah,
not just pay the 7% instead of paying it up
yeah,
front?
and you could get less of a mortgage. Yeah,
Hmm. But I
that's
mean, do you know
basically
what
what you're
people,
doing.
so it's just, yeah. I mean, like what would make someone want to pay it up
Uh,
front just so you
I
make
so
sure your cash flowing, I guess?
so I guess you're getting some economic benefit from it. Like, it's not. I don't think you're paying 100% of it, but you're paying. And I've never done the math on it. Maybe I should, but I've not done the math on that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd be curious because that's yeah, because I've always wondered because I know someone else did that too. I just never knew, what is exactly like what would the yeah, like you said, like what is the actual benefit of doing it?
Hmm.
Servicing debt, someone said. I don't know if that was related to our
Yeah,
comment.
yeah. It's you're getting to your debt service level, right? So 1.2% DCR.
Mm. Um, and anything else on the, oh, my battery is dying. Of course it needs to die when I'm on
Hmm.
live. So I'm gonna ask you a question. You can answer it, and I'm gonna like quickly run away so that I can quickly grab my charger. Um, so any other things on the financing side that you've seen changes happen that you'd want to share with investors to be able to, make sure they're not putting themselves in situations, or even, for example, because again, your plan makes sense where it's like, I mean, making a plan makes sense because I'm assuming in that plan, like you have like that, you get financed and then you're going to BRRRR, let's say a year or two down the road. And when you do that, you also have to, like, you'd be showing like what that BRRRR is like, right?
Yeah,
You'd be
and
seeing
you'd get
end to end.
yeah, and when you're buying it and making the business plan, part of the business plan is to get an appraisal that is before and after, and you work with them, so they give you an as is appraisal and an after repair appraisal, that basically will verify your business plan basically. And again, that's another expense that you're paying, but again, it gives comfort to your lender right now and a clear exit strategy down the road. I guess the other changes that have come into, or you know, I guess the thing is that financing is always changing, right? CMHC is going to change how they do business probably every 6 months to tweak it, to get it to a level that is sustainable and they don't have year-long backlogs. So I would expect more changes to come from CMHC. But what I would say is that if it's a good enough deal, that you should be able to pivot with whatever changes are made and be able to say, okay, now maybe we're doing a 3-step. So maybe I'm you know, leaving one spot and going to another to prepare to get that CMHC financing, or maybe I'm you know, maybe I'm going to stay in my secondary lender longer. But you should be able to, whatever it is, it's a business, and you know, crap happens in business. The economy changes, you know, rules change. The quicker you can pivot, the better off you will be.
That's a good point. And actually, talking about exit strategies, because I think, for example, there are lots of investors that, because the thing is, you're dealing with big buildings, so you're dealing with longer terms. Like you said, you can hit something that you weren't foreseeing. So I feel like, for example, now people are probably thinking of more multiple different exit strategies than, let's say, before, because I don't think anyone, to be honest, expected, for example, like even Amalai Select to decide to just start changing the way they do things. So what kind of,
I mean, let's be honest. We all thought it was going to happen. Like when it came out, it was too good to be true.
Oh, so you guys felt like it was too good to be true. So you felt that this was going to happen?
I didn't know what they were going to do, but I mean, here's the thing. If you think that it's always going to change and they're always going to tweak it, then you just roll with it. And it's just like, okay, what's next? What are we doing next? How are we going to, it's like a political parties in power, and you're like, oh, that's going to be bad. And it's like, well, it's not good or bad. It is what it is. It's how do we now effectively work with whatever party or MLI Select version that's going on? What's the best, you know, end result for us? How can we get there? And it's just like, okay, now we got to do this. It's going to cost maybe a little bit more money, a little bit more time. But at the end of the day, if it's still worth it, it's still worth it. So unless they get rid of it, which I don't see them doing, because it is a very popular thing that, you know, let's be honest, the Canadian government is making a shit ton of money from it. So why would they cancel it at this point?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I don't think they would cancel it, but I meant more in the sense of, but I guess I get to your point, because my sense was more just like the adapting and changing, but which is what you're saying is anyways, it's as things come up, you adapt and change. And I guess this is where the experience and inexperience comes in, because the people that usually can't adapt is maybe, for example, like their investors are only capped to a certain amount of money. And like you said, things come up and you have to bring in more money. And maybe as a new investor, you may not know either how to raise that extra money, or they didn't have, their investors have enough of a contingency fund. What kind of advice would you give, for example, now with the environment we're in, for investors to be able to pivot and change if they needed to change with their buildings? Like if they're buying a building now, what do you think they should keep in mind?
So, I mean, the pivoting to stuff you own right now is, I see a lot of people get stuck in the old ways. Well, I always did it this way. Who cares? Right? Like, you know, it's like, it doesn't matter that you've always done it that way. That way is not the most effective way anymore. So it's you have to be willing to change and grow with all of these things, right? Like it's just like, I don't know, I see a lot of real estate agents out there that are having horrible years because they're not willing to, you know, have the tough conversations with maybe their clients, with themselves, whatever that is, about pricing properties at a price that will cause them to sell. You know, and it's the same thing with investors, is maybe they're not having that tough conversation with themselves and saying, hey, what is it that's going to cause me to get closer to the end result? Maybe I'm not going to get to that exact end result right now, but what's going to get me closer? And then maybe 2, 3 years, 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road, I can get to that end result or past it again. But it might just take longer, or it's going to take, it's like the path to success, right? Everyone thinks it's like this, when it's like, right? Like you're up, you're down, and you're constantly pivoting, even in the same strategy.
I love that. That's a very great example because I think it's very true. It's exactly what you're saying. I feel like it's all about adapting and changing. And if you can't, and I felt like COVID actually was a very good example of that, especially in the restaurant industry, where it's like the ones that fell down and just like they went bankrupt were the ones that weren't willing to change. For example, that they're going to do deliveries now, and actually new one. They didn't. Surprise! These people, I guess, were loaded with money because they didn't do anything. They're like, we're a bar. We only sell like bar food. Who's gonna go and like want delivery done? So they like sucked up like, I don't know, what is it, 2, 3 years?
Yeah.
They were at least loaded that they could just do that. But imagine the amount of money you're just like depleting. But a lot of people lost their businesses, and you never know like that if you're not like willing to adapt. I feel like the majority would definitely be falling. Others may be, okay, you're really cash heavy. Good for you. You manage the old way, but something along the line will come that will have to actually make you change. And I think that's your moment to be like, are you willing to change or not? And if not, then you will see the ramifications of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, right? Like I talk to a lot of investors still, just as a real estate agent, as a real estate investor, and they're like, well, we can't buy right now, and I'm like, why not? And they're like, well, interest rates, prices. I'm like, well, put in a low ball offer. Like I like, you never get what you don't ask for. If they're going to get upset by it, then oh well, move on to the next one.
Yeah. I have a great example, actually, just lent to one where we talk about being able to cash flow on a single family home doesn't exist in Ontario. And this person found one. Imagine a strategy. Their plan is to sell it, but we obviously went through the different strategies to make sure that they're covered. And imagine a property that will cash flow on a single family and who tells them that you can't do it? It's like just go with your criteria, what it is that you want, and you just have to be persistent
Yeah.
in finding it. Sooner or later, it's going to come. And so I thought that was a great example that you gave because it is true. I've seen some pretty amazing things. Like you said, like let's say people aren't flipping. I saw in Oakville, they got over asking. They're expecting to get around like 50, 60K. They ended up making 100K in profits.
Yeah.
Which is just like they weren't expecting that, but people are saying you can't flip right now, so it's very true. I feel like
I mean,
sticking to
I think it's a great flipping environment. I think you just have to know your buy, because when prices were going up, I don't know, what, 5-10% a month, literally you could buy anything and not even do any work and make 10% profit on it in a month or two. Now you got to look and say, okay, the trend is that we're losing 0.5 to 1% a month of the value of this property. So what's my timeline? 6 months to a year. Okay, so let's just estimate that I'm going to lose 6 to 7% at the this property. So on $1 million property, let's call it $70,000. So right away, I'm like, okay, I need to budget that into my buy, and then okay, my renovation and all this type of stuff that you typically put in is the same thing. But now you got to go and say, okay, well, I can buy it for this, and I'm happy to buy it for this. And by the way, I'm happy not to buy it if you don't want to do it too. And then it's just look at enough properties, you'll find one, you'll find a deal, you'll find somebody who needs to sell and that is happy to work with you.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. I love that you're saying that because It's true, and right now it's just the environment to make sure you do your research, like you were saying, right? It's like, okay, what cities are good, for example, for buying, let's say we were talking about flips, or for even buying like apartment buildings that meet the criteria or close to the criteria you're looking for. Like that. Like I feel like this is the environment where you do have to do more research. You do have to kind of keep an eye on what's going on a lot more compared to like that a few years ago where people were just buying anything and
Yeah.
not really paying attention. And just, I felt like some people were just crossing their fingers, like should go up another 20%, so I'm good to go. And I'm like, I hope so for you.
Yeah. But again, that's unsustainable at the end of the day, right? I don't know. Like it's funny how it all cycles. Like when I was buying apartment buildings in Hamilton, like 08, 09, literally you'd go out and look at 6, 7 apartment buildings that were for sale, and you'd be like, oh, 4 or 5 of them, the numbers work. And it's like, okay, which one do we buy? You'd buy one of them. And, who knew at that point you should have just bought them all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that you're still overpaying in Ontario. But at the end of the day, there's there's still the economic incentive to buy it here for the simple fact that, I think there was 500,000 people who came into Ontario last year. We're not building that many places for people to live. So of course we're going to get, of course there's going to be a housing crisis when that happens. So if you have rental properties in Ontario, then you're going to do well. Because again, they're just not building enough of them.
Yeah, 100% agree. Any final words that you'd like to share? Anything about you, what's going on that you'd like the community to know about you, or any final words before we go?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to buy apartment buildings or own apartment buildings, I'm happy to connect with you. I'd love to chat with you, whether it's in Ontario or Alberta. Even if you're buying them down in the States, I love to, learn about that stuff at some point and talk to you a little bit about difference in financing. So if you guys want to catch up, hit me up on Insta and we'll go from there.
Love it, love it. Thanks so much, Mark, for coming on. It was so much to chat with you. If you guys love what you heard from Mark, he's going to be tagged on here, so you'll get to follow him and see what he's up to. Send him a DM if you're interested in chatting. And if you guys love my show, definitely follow me and you'll be notified of the next show we have on. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone. We'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, Diana.